Let's get this thing started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the August 29th, 2018 Merrimack Zoning Board of Adjustments meeting. If everybody would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. For anybody that will be speaking this evening, if you could please stand, raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. All right. Rich, if you could start us off the preamble, please.
Absolutely. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will proceed with the petitions in the order they are listed on the agenda unless the board deems it appropriate to take a petition out of order. State law and local ordinances set out the criteria that must be met in order for this board to grant a request. The minimum requirements are outlined in the form provided by the Community Development Office, and the petitioner should proceed with this format to provide adequate justification for the board to grant the request. The chair will then open the meeting to hear testimony either for or against the request. All discussion will be between the speaker and the board. Please be respectful of all and in the interest of time, refrain from repeating previous testimony. No new documentation will be accepted by the board for consideration this evening, but the board reserves the right to ask for additional testimony at any time. After hearing the facts from all parties regarding the petition, the chairman will close the public hearing and the board will deliberate and vote on the request before moving on to the next petition. And please turn off all cell phones and pagers.
Thank you, Rich.
Especially the pagers.
A couple of notes. The next ZBA meeting will be September 26th, 2018. I also wanted to take a quick moment to recognize Tony Pellegrino, who is no longer with the zoning board. He received a special certificate award from town council recognition. Thank you. The town council meeting. Tony's going to be very much missed. He was on the board when I started, taught me a lot about the zoning and politics in Concord. So Tony is decided to step down from the zoning board. That being said, Kathleen Stroud has been promoted to a full-time member from alternate, and our new alternate is Drew Duffy, who is this is our first meeting. So, congratulations, ladies, and again, Tony, we are gonna miss you. We have the annual election for officers and review of rules and procedure. I am going to move that to item number 9 so that we can get right into the petitions for this evening. When you come up, the petitions, please make sure that the microphone, the light is bright green. Make sure that you also please sign in and you state your name for the record. First petition is Daniel D. Jessman, petitioner and AMPK Ventures LLC owner, variance under section 2.02.3B of the zoning ordinance to permit a contractor yard in the general commercial district. The parcel is located at 702 Daniel Webster Highway and the C2 General Commercial. Tax map 7E lot 023-01, case number 2018-19. This item has been continued from the July 2018 meeting. And Attorney Michael, it's good to see you this evening.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. Always a pleasure to come to Merrimack.
Okay. Out of here. Sorry. Thank you.
As the chairman just described, this is a request that we filed for a variance for a contractor yard in the general commercial C2 zone. At the outset, I'd like to point out that the property, I'd like to get the other mic.
Hold on, they're checking it right now. We have no, yeah, he's coming out.
Judicious. In any event, the parcel of land, as I mentioned, is lot 78, lot 2301, located on the Daniel Webster Highway. Right across the road is the Flatley property that is industrial. This particular parcel's in the C2 general commercial zone. The back edge of Maple Ridge is here, the bowling alley is here. Again, the churches, there's a couple of residences, and as the board is well aware, this road is an amalgam of different items, running the gamut from a septic service to other landscapers to the wood facility that the Lamberts run, Majestic Motors, the list is endless, a couple of restaurants, gas stations, and so forth and so on. The plan on this particular parcel, which is about 2.2 acres in size, if my memory serves me correctly, is to allow a so-called contractor's yard. My client intends to build an office building, which I would point out is permitted. He would have displays of some of the items that he would be storing in the back for sales to his clients. I'm going to point out something. The sales are not on site. He does not and will not be doing retail sales per se on the site. They are retail sales. In other words, if he is engaged to do a landscaping job and you need 25 pavers, let's assume, you would pay for those. He would put them on a truck, come to your house, and ordinarily do landscape work, a service that's performed by landscapers. He's also going to have some firewood to help get him through the winter. And in the winter, when the mowers aren't being parked here, he'll have a plow. He will do some plowing, like most landscapers do some plowing in the winter months to help ease the pain, if you will, during those months. I do note a special exception was granted for the site for residential, but that's, again, not what we're here for. And I would point out that any action that the board takes does not necessarily negate that if the plan is not approved by you and the planning board. We believe that this is not a contractor yard. I want to start there. And I want to make it clear that the board has the ability in the first instance to determine whether the words, definitions, and concept of contractor yard you believe that it is. There's a case that came down a short while ago. And basically, I'll read it. It's Fox versus Greenland. The trial court upheld the ZBA decision, your decision, not somebody else's decision, to treat Packard's project as a retail sales service, a little bit like what we have here, and found that such a use is permitted in the industrial zone. Now, to do that, they needed a special exception, but it was different than what the abutters felt. It should be a variance. They felt a number of things. But the court said it was within the power of the zoning board, within its jurisdiction, if you will, to make a preliminary determination as to what you can and can't do. This isn't really an administrative appeal issue. It's a definitional issue. And I'm going to take you briefly through the ordinance because I think this is very important. We don't dispute that there could be an argument here either way. But we believe that when you listen to this, at the end of the day, the scale weighs in favor of it being allowed as is. If you look at 2.023, that defines general commercial permitted uses. In recognition of the demand created by Merrimack's strategic location and continuing growth, commercial areas are hereby designated, allowing for the establishment of retail businesses. Well, first of all, our client does have a form of retail business. He's selling blocks, landscape timbers, loam, mulch. Those are items that people buy those at Home Depot. People buy some of that stuff at Reed's Ferry Lumber. People buy firewood at Lambert's big location that sits on the Daniel Webster Highway. They have piles and piles of timber that they stack up. So to suggest that this is something unusual, it really isn't. But then only the following uses are permitted. First, stores for the sale of goods at retail. Well, we are selling goods at retail. It's a little different than the normal, you walk in, back up and buy bags of mulch. That isn't what we do. You buy mulch, Jessamine delivers the mulch, lays it out for you. Landscaping service. So we do have goods at retail. It's a little bit different, but nonetheless retail. Or, the ordinance says, or, not and, or, performance of regional customary personal services. Okay, regional customary commercial services. You know, this isn't defined very well in our ordinance. I looked in the definition section to say, gee, could I find customary personal services? I couldn't find that. 3, and finally, or, again, or not and, or services clearly incidental to retail sales, including services and this is the big one, construction materials. It's permitted. And then it talks about fabrication, that we're not doing it. I would point out that stores for retail would be allowed. Performance of regional customary services, we could talk about that. Let's talk about it. Dry cleaners, laundromats, septic pumping. AB Septic is there. They've got trucks in the back, several fairly large trucks, as a matter of fact. Auto repair or landscaping, these are services. But let's take a look at the last one, number 3. Services clearly incidental to retail sales, including services and construction materials. None of these words are defined in the ordinance. If you look for construction materials, if you look for the word incidental, you won't find them. So let's go to the dictionary. Services. Webster defines it, work or duties performed for others. That's what Webster says. Not a bad definition, and clearly I think we can agree somewhat that that's what the definition of a service is. The next word, interestingly enough, is incidental to retail sales, and that's not defined. And you might think, and be careful here, that that's like accessory uses. The court in Batchelder versus Town of Plymouth said, no, nay, that's not what this is. When they were confronted with this concept, the court said that while incidental means subordinate to a use, that does not imply limitations on quantity or type of use that's incidental. They're saying, hey, and they clearly said this isn't an accessory use. Not accessory. Right in the case. It's not an accessory use like a garage or a swimming pool. Here we believe the landscape design and repairs and installation, using stuff that he has on site and intends to store on site, is not a violation. That's not a contractor yard. And let's take a look at what's a contractor yard. Again, not defined. That's why unfortunately, I'm kind of taking us through this. It's important. It's not defined. There's nothing in our contractor yard is X. It's what this board, I think, and using common sense says it is. But let's look at it. Ordinarily, large trucks, big dump trucks, bulldozers, large equipment trailers, backhoes, supplies of construction materials that aren't sold to the consumer. They're taken to a job and incorporated within that job, like framing materials, siding, bricks, but not sold at retail there. Not at all. It's a place where they plunk this stuff to put it on a dump truck, put it on a big trailer, put it on things to take it to the site. That's what you need a variance for in the C2 zone. Again, if we itemize each word, if we look at what we're talking about, we believe that if you look at the road, Daly's Landscaping is on the road. They're in the C2 zone. Reeds Ferry Lumber sells a lot of lumber and timber. They're in the C1 or C2. AB Septic is there. I mentioned Lambert's. I think if you take a look at the purpose and definition of what I described before under the ordinance, under our ordinance, that we fit under it. We don't have big, huge trucks. We don't store, we're not there with big backhoes and bulldozers. That isn't what we do. It's a landscape service. And they have materials to do that work. They take it to the job and do it. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any questions from the board before we get into the 5 points?
Actually, I have a question just to kind of paraphrase. So
Go ahead.
if we were to try to apply the ordinance in its current state to this, then we're saying that it can be one or the other. It can be the storage of landscaping stuff, or it can be a retail outlet for landscaping materials, but it can't be both. Is that?
No, it could be both.
Yeah.
It's incidental to the retail sales. It says it right in the ordinance. It's incidental to retail sales, construction materials. It's right there. The town wrote it, not me. I can be blamed for a few things in the ordinance, but not this.
The only thing I would disagree with is that, you know, the equipment size. I mean, you're gonna have dump bodies, you're gonna have long trailers. I mean, I've worked in landscaping, I've seen landscaping, so, but I mean, and I'm not gonna I don't wanna go tit for tat on it, but I'm just saying from that side of it.
I follow that, Patrick, but, you know, any of these things have trucks and trailers.
Yeah.
And we have a number of them littered up the road. And I'm not saying that's right or
Deny
wrong.
it, yeah.
I think it's consistent with the ordinance, quite frankly. But again, you're right, we're not gonna go tit for tat with this.
Yeah.
I just want that as part of it, because I think the board in its final findings could say, yeah, we've heard everything,
Mhm.
but we don't think it really fits
Okay.
under that, and we all move on. With that in mind, if the board would like to proceed with the 5 criteria, we're happy
I
to
have
do
a
that. We're
question.
certainly ready to do
Actually,
that.
one question, yep, or 2 questions. Go ahead, Fran.
How many vehicles do you have, and
How many
vehicles
park there?
you park there are going to be going in and out?
Don't forget the mic.
We've got parking for 5 or 6 vehicles, but they're not going to be used all of the time.
I'm talking about the company vehicles. How many company vehicles?
5 or 6.
5 or 6? And do people would they go into your retail?
They could,
Go in.
it's like a display. You've
Okay,
been-
but
been to
you're gonna have customers going in and out, is what I'm saying
Well,
also.
occasionally. Most people call up, we go out to Danny goes to the site, and he evaluates what people want. I want
Okay,
pavers, I want this.
That's where I
And
was getting
then,
to, yeah.
occasionally, people will come to the place to look at different pavers, different landscape timbers, but it's not a retail operation.
It's not a showcase place?
No, it is not.
Okay.
That is not his business. It's only there for people to be able to decide what they think they might want to use, that's all.
That's
Does that
what
help?
my question was. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
We have, I think it's Raisin,
Raised in the Landscape, the old McDonald's.
right.
Yeah, he's down
No,
there.
that's not the one I'm thinking of. I'm thinking the
Well,
one.
he's down at the
Labrie.
old McDonald's
Labrie.
site.
Yeah, Labrie is the one that's up just south of
Yeah,
you.
Labrie's there.
Is that similar to what you're?
Similar, yeah. Similar, yes. He's there. So I appreciate the thinking here. I want to make it clear, and I agree with your chairman. I'm not here to debate this till the cows come home or the landscape timbers fall. My point here is that I really think that we're not part of this. And hell, the industrial zone's across the street. It's right
Right.
there. And if we could find a spot there, this is a rather unique parcel. It's the only parcel I'm aware of on the kind of the westerly side of DW that's not developed. I think it's the only remaining parcel that would be available. And if we could find a small parcel along the DW highway, which we've looked and can't, quite frankly, that's for sale, we might try that, but we can't. But more importantly, I don't think that we really need to. I think this fits the C2 zone. Thank you.
All right, well, let's go into the 5 points, and then we'll just stop after each one in case there's any questions.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the board. My name's Brett Allard. I'm with Bernstein Scher as well, an associate of Attorney Michaels. I'll be going through the 5 points.
Please.
So the first one to address is whether the variance is contrary to the public interest. And the courts have held that any variance by its very nature will in some measure be contrary to the ordinance, but to be contrary to the public interest, the variance must unduly conflict with the ordinance such that it violates basic zoning objectives. And one of the things that courts really look at when they're looking at this prong is the impact on the character of the neighborhood. And here, for more or less all the reasons that Attorney Michael already went through, this is not going to alter the character of the neighborhood. It's consistent with the other landscaping yards and similar businesses that are right in the area. It's permitted right across the street in the industrial zone. The second part of that is the health and safety. Here, it's going to be used by the applicants and some employees. As we discussed, some customers coming onto the property, but not a ton, so not a huge impact on traffic, really no impact on traffic. And in that regard, there actually is an existing curb cut from DW Highway onto the property. And for those reasons, no adverse effect to the health or safety, or really any impact on abutters or traffic.
Any questions on that? Number 2.
The second prong is whether the variance is consistent with the spirit of the ordinance, and courts have held that this prong is very closely related to the first one. And here, this proposal is consistent with the spirit of the ordinance. The lot would comply with all dimensional and area requirements. It wouldn't violate basic zoning objectives. Buffers and setbacks are going to be met. And if you look at the basic zoning objective of the C2 zone, it is to, in part, as Attorney Michael addressed, to facilitate retail sales and services, including construction materials, and that's precisely what we have here. And it, as I said, it is permitted across the street. In that you have daily outdoor services, and Labrie Landscaping, the businesses that we've addressed right in the area doing more or less the same thing. So we would say that based on all that, this is consistent with the spirit of the ordinance and consistent with more specifically, the spirit of the C2 zone itself.
Any questions on number 2? Number 3, please.
The third prong is whether substantial justice is done, and the courts have held that there's substantial justice done when there's no harm to the public that outweighs the benefit to the applicant. Here, no harm to the public. There would be a loss to the detriment of the applicant if the variance is denied. He would be unable to utilize the lot for the proposed use, which, as we've addressed, based on the zones being across the street from each other and the unavailability of a suitable lot in the industrial zone across the street, that really makes this lot the most suitable one in the area for this type of use. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's the only undeveloped lot, and the granting the variance tonight would not be outweighed by any, or denying the variance tonight would not be outweighed by any gain to the public. There would be no gain to the general public if the variance was denied, and that's that.
Number 4.
The fourth prong is whether the values of surrounding properties will not be diminished. The landscaping contractor's yard are consistent with this area, as we've addressed. It is a very mixed-use, mixed-bag area with a whole bunch of different uses there. The traffic is going to be very minimal. As I said, there's an existing curb cut, which will facilitate access without any heavy impacts on traffic. And these are all things that can diminish property values if they end up adversely affecting neighboring properties, but it's really just not going to be an issue here.
Any questions? Number 5.
Literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. And as this board knows, the first thing we need to address when looking at hardship is the special conditions that distinguish it from other properties in the area. And for this property, there's really 2 big things that distinguish it from other properties in the area. The first one is the use. You have the bowling alley next door. On the other side, you have lots that are being used residentially in the C2 zone. Across the street, you have the industrial zone where this would be permitted by right. And so this is the only undeveloped lot in the area with existing street access and existing curb cut in DW Highway, which makes it special in its environment, in that it is the only property on that side of the street with that availability. And the second condition that really distinguishes this from other properties in the area is its size. It's a little over 2 acres, 2.01 acres approximately. It's the smallest undeveloped lot in the area. And for example, the other nearby lots across the street, which where this would be permitted by right, are lots 6E-3-5, a little over 11 acres, 3-6, 13 acres, 2-2, 21 acres, and 3-4, 45 acres. So based on the size of the lots around this property, it is distinguishable in that regard as well.
And then the proposed use.
The
Proposed use is reasonable.
proposed use is reasonable, more or less just a wrap-up for all the things we've been touching on tonight that all really go to reasonableness. The landscaping contractor yards are permitted in this area, even mere feet away across the highway, but not specifically on this side of the street, even though there are plenty of businesses on our side of the street that are doing more or less the same thing that we're proposing. No increase in traffic. It's really a perfect size and location for this sort of operation. It's consistent with the spirit of the ordinance and the character of the environment, and based on that and the fact that it's so close to being permitted by right anyways, as Attorney Michael took us through, that we would say that it's more consistent with the zoning ordinance to have it in the C2 zone itself, and would be consistent with the character of the area.
Any questions from the board? Okay. Any questions for Attorney Michael? Okay. I'm going to open up the hearing to the public. Is there anybody that'd like to speak for this petition? Is there anybody that'd like to speak against this petition? I'm going to close the public then. Before we go to deliberation, are there any final questions, concerns, anything that you want to ask the gentleman before us before we have our discussion? Talk about contractor yards, talk about what you think is permitted, ask any questions about what they're looking for. I have a question. The building you're putting in there, is that gonna be I'm assuming, but I should never assume, is that just a one-story building or like a two-story building?
1 story.
One story, okay. Okay. So, I'll close the public hearing. So then, discussion on the board. Just so you know, there is on this property, there has been a special exemption granted. It was granted back in May 2018. And if for residential, and if this is approved this evening, the next step will be to have planning board sign off on final site plan and approval. So right now, we're not really looking at the site plan approval, that's planning boards. What we want to look at is is this doable? Is this acceptable based upon what they're looking to accomplish? And so I will open up to anybody who has any questions, comments, or discussion. Or motions.
Question for staff. If we agree with Attorney Michael that this is a permitted use,
Okay,
and we don't need a variance,
okay.
then how is that handled here?
I'd have to check with Robert, planning and zoning administrator. I think we'd still need to change the ordinance, so
Well, we're not gonna change the ordinance, that's a given.
I'd have to check with Robert and Tim.
I think we treat each ordinance on a case-by-case basis, and in this case, we just vote on the variance.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
If
sir.
you were to determine that it does not require a variance, we would then withdraw our request. Case closed.
And if we do grant a variance versus considering this as a permitted use, how does that change potential future uses?
It's every man for himself. I don't know how to describe it otherwise.
Yeah.
If someone bought a business, he can continue the business. I think we all know that.
Right.
If you're going to change it to something else, then you're going to be looking at whether it conforms to the C2 zone
True, okay.
or
I'm
it's
good.
something else.
Yep,
So,
good.
for that reason, that's why I say we vote on the variance this evening, and we can, if we want to look at the ordinance down the road, we can, and that is certainly something we can have a discussion with staff, but I would say on a case-by-case basis at this point, and vote on the variance as it is.
Yeah, I'm just thinking I don't think it makes any difference.
Right.
If we grant a variance for this, then they're gonna go ahead and do it, and whatever happens in the future with other uses won't change. If we say you don't need it, they're gonna go ahead and what they do. And if there's a change in use or something, then we're gonna deal with that at the time.
So I'm hearing a motion.
So I'm gonna suggest we err on the side of caution, and, in the case of Daniel Justman and AMPK Ventures, we grant the variance under section 2.02.3B of the zoning ordinance to permit a contractor yard in the general commercial district. Parcel is located at 702 Daniel Webster Highway in the C2, General Commercial Tax Map 7E, Lot 023-01, case number 2018-19.
Second.
All right, do I have a second from Fran? All in favor of granting the petition, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Abstain? 500.
Can we add
Congratulations.
the
Thank you, John.
condition?
Oh, sorry. There was a condition.
Yes, subject to the conditions in the staff memo.
Yeah. Obtain site plan approval from the planning board.
Yeah, Tim,
Yeah, that's all.
conditions.
That's all.
Okay, all right, good. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a good evening. Good luck. Thank you.
But it is subject to it, because they have to cut the plan.
All right, next is, I'm gonna really try to pronounce that. I apologize if I.
Let Brad do it.
Ekapon Sakanatsi, okay, all right, petitioner and JPM Real Estate LLC, owner, variance under section 2.02.1 and is 2.02.11 of the zoning ordinance to permit a restaurant in the residential and aquifer conservation districts. The parcel is located 80 Continental Boulevard in the R Residential and Aquifer Conservation Districts and Wellhead Protection Area. Tax map 3C, lot 040-01, case number 2018-22. Welcome. How you doing?
Thank you and good evening, Mr. Chairman, and good job on your pronunciation.
Thank you.
My name is Brad Westgate. I'm a lawyer with Weiner Bennett and Nashua, 111 Concord Street, and I represent the applicant, Ekapon Saktanaset.
All right, I was
Mr.
close.
Saktanaset goes by Eddie commonly.
How you doing, Eddie?
Good idea.
Easier to do, and he's sitting with me at the table. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, the application is for a use variance to permit a restaurant at 80 Continental Boulevard. It's a variance request under the section 2.02.1, the residential district use provisions, and the related aquifer protection district provisions, because anything in the aquifer protection district has to be permitted in the residential district. So there's an abundance of caution. We've referenced both provisions. Perhaps I can give just a little bit of background relative to the property as I outlined in our application, and then go to the 5 criteria. And I'll try to be concise.
Thank you.
The property, again, is 80 Continental Boulevard, and it's at the intersection of Industrial Drive and Continental Boulevard, sort of the backside of the premium outlets, if you will, next to the Merrimack Village District property. And also, it's right across the street from what's, I gather, going to become the Merrimack Park Place mixed-use development.
They hope.
That's still, I think, going through the processes, as I understand it. This is the facility that was, houses the Dunkin' Donuts at 80 Continental Boulevard. The Dunkin' Donuts, half of the building's about 1,956 square feet. There's a vacant piece, a vacant bay, if you will, part of that same building, of 1,500 square feet that the applicant desires to lease from JPM Real Estate LLC, the property owner, to operate a Thai sushi restaurant. The applicant's in that industry already. He and his family have been Thai restaurant operators and presently are.
Okay.
Property has about 1.34 acres of land. Again, this is a major signalized intersection that it's located on. It's literally at the very edge of the residential district. To the north of the property is the I-3 district. Across the street where Merrimack Park Place will be is I-2. Southeast of the property, of course, is the Fidelity campus, and Village premium outlets are around the corner. Those are really the only true and key abutters. The restaurant, again, 1,500 square feet, anticipated to have 24 seats. No site improvements, building improvements other than interior fit-up are required. There'll be some signage changes, obviously, but we're going to work within the existing signage variance that was granted in 2012. We outlined in the application a little bit of sort of additional data, just so that you had a complete picture of the application in case you had certain questions. One thing that the applicant and John Mata, who's JPM Real Estate, did was, through staff, was to check with DOT, the state DOT, as to whether they had a concerns because originally, when the variance was granted in 2011 for the Dunkin' Donuts, it carried with it retail space contemplated for the 1,500 square feet. That's different than the restaurant use, so we wanted DOT to be comfortable with the restaurant use versus retail use. They responded by letter to Tim Thompson some months ago with a couple of recommendations to be done on the drive-in, if you will. They will be done. Mr. Mott has agreed to do that, and I so affirmed in our application. We also want to make sure that the sewer permit gallonage discharge was sufficient, so we did some analysis of that and proved that out by the applicant's prior customary uses at other restaurants that are similar, coupled with the Dunkin' Donuts uses, and I outlined that as well. Parking, we know that's a planning board matter, but we wanted to be sure that we had sufficient parking spaces, did some calculations. If you analyze both as Dunkin' Donuts as fast food and the applicants as a regular restaurant, you need 25 spaces. On the average of sort of highest employment, number of people there, other than odd times of year where there may be a bit more employees, say at a New Year's Day kind of thing, or the Dunkin' Donuts is busier perhaps. Coffee is necessary on New Year's Day, I gather. And that pans out as well. So we wanted to just give you that background of additional information. We think that this is a good use for the property because, first of all, again, no improvements are necessary other than internal fit-up. You have an existing restaurant that is really morning-focused. Primarily, this will be lunchtime and evening-focused, so you don't have a significant cross-current, if you will, on traffic and parking needs. So that's effectively the background information, Mr. Chairman, and there's more detail in our application, which of course is part of your record, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Any questions before the 5 points of law? Okay, if you have 5 points of law, please.
Thank you very much. So to address the 5 criteria, first, of course, is that granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. That is, you've heard many times, is a somewhat, sometimes an analysis of character of the area, impact on character of the area. We would respectfully submit that although this property is in a residential district, it's on the edge of the residential district, in what's really a commercial or industrial area, not located adjacent to residential properties, but located by all means, non-residential properties. So it's, by its character, it's not obviously conducive to residential use. The board, in effect, found that back in 2011 when granting the variance that allowed the Dunkin' Donuts and the retail facility. As mentioned, the north of the property is the I-3 industrial district, and you've got the other significant existing and probably future residential and non-residential retail and mixed-use uses nearby. You also have a significant employment center in Fidelity nearby, and we're thinking that a small restaurant is probably a better use, or maybe a little more compatible use to this site than just sort of another retail facility, if you will, when retail's really concentrated in the premium outlets. We know it's permitted by the variance, but our hope is that this is a more compatible use for the site and for what's nearby in the area. So we would submit that given the location of the property, it's not contrary to the public interest for this variance to be granted. Second criteria is the spirit of the ordinance is
Actually, if you
observed.
could-
Oh,
I'm
pardon me.
sorry about
Right,
that.
you may have
That's okay.
questions. I'm sorry.
I'm sure there's probably, but
I
any
apologize.
questions on number 1? Oh, Number 2,
Thank
please.
you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Second is that the spirit of the ordinance be observed, and we think that the spirit of the ordinance is observed when properties that are adjacent to each other have harmonious uses. Obviously, this restaurant would have a harmonious use with the Dunkin' Donuts, given the nature of the busy times, for example, but also given the nature of the properties nearby and the type of intersection and thoroughfare it's on, we would submit that it's harmonious with those uses as well. The residential use is obviously they're not the best and appropriate use for this property. The board's already found that. And this complements nicely, we would respectfully submit the existing use with the Dunkin' Donuts site. And frankly, with the mixed use coming in, if that's the case, even more so, I think, in that immediate area.
Any questions? Number 3, granting.
Thank you, thank you. Third criteria is that granting the variance would do substantial justice. You heard even tonight that substantial justice is done if there's no harm to the public by the granting of the variance. We would submit that there is no harm to the public if the variance is granted, but if it wasn't granted, there would be harm to the applicant because it would not permit what we think would be a sensible and compatible use for this property, both again in the area and for the immediate site itself.
Questions? Number 4.
Thank you. Fourth criteria is that the value of surrounding properties will not be diminished if the variance is granted. Again, we're really in an area that's non-residential, even though we're on the edge of the residential zone. The building is already there, so we're not putting up a new building that would have any sort of significant or material visual impact on the area. Certainly new construction or new vitality of a new business in a commercial area is always good for property values. It shows the liveliness of the area and the sort of economic goals that people have and indicates that applicants and people come before you are willing to even enhance an area that's non-residential with these commercial uses. And again, there's no change or improvements to the site.
Any questions? Unnecessary hardship.
And the fifth criteria, of course, is the hardship criteria. It's a two-pronged test. The first component of it is that owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from others in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship because no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. And the second prong is that the proposed use is reasonable. So we first identify the special conditions of this property, and you've heard them all pretty much already. Just to summarize the few key ones, we're located on a major thoroughfare at a major signalized intersection, therefore not a residential area in nature. We have commercial and industrial uses nearby. The properties and uses immediately adjacent to us are non-residential in character. Residential uses aren't compatible with this location. And that's really borne out by the history of this property. It's been used for non-residential purposes since 1979 with a hiatus here or there of non-use going back to a previous use as office facility. And with the mixed-use project likely coming on board across the street, it even makes more criteria, the uniqueness of this for non-residential uses. So it's got a number of special conditions. We put those into perspective and try to say, well, given those conditions, is there any substantial relationship between the purpose of the ordinance, meaning not allowing this type of use, and those special conditions? And we would submit that there's a disconnect between the purpose of the ordinance and the special conditions. The ordinance's purpose is not to have a straitjacket on a portion of a residential zone that is literally not near residential properties, but near major commercial properties. The ordinance doesn't preclude a variance that allows a reasonable, modest commercial use in a residential spot that is right at an intersection of commercial properties. So the purpose of the ordinance is not frustrated by this particular use because of these special criteria and special conditions the property has. It's also important to remember that the enabling legislation for zoning ordinances contemplates that ordinances recognize the character of the area. So you can't have an ordinance that is contrary to the character of the area and preclude uses that would make sense given the nature of the area. So, and the variance process that you all administer is the safety valve for that. So granting the variance allows consistency with the ordinance because it allows for a use that's consistent with the character of the area, which the zoning statutes want zoning ordinances to permit. So we would submit that it would be an unnecessary hardship imposed if the variance wasn't granted because it would frustrate this basic purpose of the ordinance, which is to permit harmonious uses in the particular area. That's the first prong.
Okay. Second prong?
Second prong is that the property be a reasonable use. We would submit it's a reasonable use to have a small Thai sushi restaurant in this bay, if you will, at the Dunkin' Donuts facility. It's consistent with what else is there and all that I've said previously about the non-residential nature of the area itself.
Any questions? All set?
Thank
All
you, Mr.
right.
Chairman.
Before I open it up to the public comment, is there any further questions, concerns, thoughts? Okay, I will open up to the public. Is there anybody that'd like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anybody that'd like to speak against this petition? Okay, fair enough. Before I close the public hearing, any last chance, any comments? Fran, all set?
Basically, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think you're gonna get a lot of noontime people down there. So, and it'll be something different from what's down the area now, so, yeah.
All right, well, I'll close the public hearing, and any further discussion by the board, motions?
I'd like to make the motion that we grant the petitioner, I apologize, Eddie and JPM Real Estate LLC owner, variances under section 2.02.1 and 2.02.11 of the zoning ordinance to permit a restaurant in the residential and aquifer conservation districts, parcels located at 80 Continental Boulevard in the residential and aquifer conservation districts and wellhead protection area, tax map 3C, lot 040-01, case 2018-22, with the attached staff recommendation that the petitioner shall obtain any applicable approvals deemed necessary and applicable by the Community Development Department, either administrative approval by staff or site plan approval by the planning board.
Second.
Wow, that's a tough one. We'll go with Kathleen seconding on that.
I have a question
Sure, before we vote.
for staff. Does this need to be subject to the entryway the DOT is requesting? The striping that's supposed to be on that driveway in, and it's not specifically the petitioner, but do we need to make this subject to that?
Doesn't that fall under community
I-
development?
I think that's encompassed in the condition
Okay,
when we determine if
that's all I'm asking.
planning board is necessary.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 500. Congratulations. Just so you know, there is 30 days that somebody can appeal, so if you do start your work before 30 days, it is at your own risk. Otherwise, congratulations. Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome to town.
Next is Joseph and Christine Minor, petitioner owner, special exception under section 3.09 of the zoning ordinance to permit the conversion of an existing single-family dwelling constructed before January 29th, 1953 to a two-family dwelling. The parcel is located at 10 Griffin Street in the C2 General Commercial and Aquifer Conservation Districts, tax map 4D-4, lot 059, case number 2018-23. Deja vu.
Good evening again, Attorney Michael, on behalf of the petitioner, as it relates to the lot on Griffin Street. I've highlighted it in yellow just for the purposes to allow you to see it. It does have an easement that runs through it. This is formerly the old Lozo pool site, and some of you may recall that, some of you may not. I would point out that the miners live in the house directly south on Griffin Street. They own this property as well. They own both properties. The issue before the board tonight, and this quite frankly, this case fascinates the daylights out of me. That doesn't happen all that often, but it's an interesting case. You've got 3 items on your agenda. I would point out that if one of them is granted, the others would be withdrawn. I want to make it clear that you're not going to listen to all of it. It all relates to the same thing, which, as your chairman pointed out, is to allow two-family use of the house. We will not be changing the exterior of the house, and this is critical, because part of their staff report is very interesting. They've indicated that the use technically is a permitted use, two-family. Why? When you're in the commercial zone with sewer and water, you treat it as if it's an R4 residential zone, which with sewer and water, residential is permitted. The thing you run into are the grandfathered deficiencies. Grandfathered. This building's been here since 1893, Brett? 1890? Whatever, 1893.
Long time.
And you've got three grandfathered deficiencies. Lot size, it's 0.62 acres, it's not 80,000 square feet. You've got frontage, doesn't have the appropriate frontage on the road, although the frontage is more than sufficient for this purpose, I would point out. And you've got a frontage setback issue. But these have been this way. They all predate zoning, all of it. I'm going to let Brett kind of take you through a little more technical nuance of this. And there's a couple of interesting cases that the Supreme Court decided that we believe support the theory of our administrative appeal, which is simply stated that if you're not expanding the location, you're not adding to the square footage, it's merely interior, then the grandfathered uses don't change that allowance, if I'm making myself clear. They don't change that allowance. Staff respectfully disagrees. They believe that even though the use is allowed, that when you're somehow changing something, and what they fail to recognize, if you read 9.04 of the ordinance, which they cite in their memo, Brett will talk about that briefly, but just to give you a heads up, that particular provision supports our request. It supports it. So it's an interesting case, and we respect their opinion. I want to make that clear. I don't want to, again, turn this into a tit-for-tat evening. I don't want to do that. The chairman warned me of that earlier, so I'll do my best not to. But having said that, I think this is a very important issue in dealing with this. Just as a sidebar, the law in the state generally allows the, how do I put it politely, the expansion of a non-conforming use within a structure, if it's on the same lot. Non-conforming use. We're not proposing that. We're proposing a use that's allowed, which makes this an even more interesting case. I'm going to stop talking for the moment. I've kind of given you a brief overview. I know you know what the property is. It's a mixed bag area anyway. But having said that, I'd like him to take you through a little more of this technical side of the admin appeal. Thank you.
Before you get into the admin appeal, if you don't mind me,
Sure.
I would actually I'd like to just propose, or actually what I'd like to do is I'd like to just address the special exception under section 3.09 of the zoning ordinance. The because if it is approved, then we don't discuss the administrative appeal.
I'll do it for you. How's that? Without prejudice to me coming back to this.
Right.
I just want to make that clear.
I fully understand.
I don't want somebody to think that because we went to a special exception that somehow we agreed that there was jurisdiction that we even needed the special exception. You all with me on this?
Right.
'Cause I don't want somebody to say, well, you pressed ahead with your special exception, so that means you felt you needed relief from the board. I will gladly defer. I will gladly do that for you. I think that's a sensible request. I don't have any problem with that, with only the proviso that I believe is appropriate in this case.
No, and I recognize and understand what you're saying, but if the special exception
I
goes
agree.
through, then the
We're
rest
done.
is moot.
Fred,
Thank-
move to the special exception, please.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Attorney Michael. Mike? Oh, there you go.
All right, we're good now. So the special exception criteria, as this board is aware, consists of 8 parts. And the first part is that the additions, alterations, or improvements are for a use currently permitted within the zoning district, as Attorney Michael just took us through. Both the existing use, single-family residential, and the proposed use, two-family residential, are both permitted in this zone where the property is hooked into municipal sewer and water.
Any questions on that, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, number 2, please.
Number 2 is the additions, alterations, or improvements are ordinarily and customarily associated with the existing building and/or use. It's not unusual for a single-family home to be reconfigured internally into a two-family home where there's sufficient space for it, like there is here. Those alterations are ordinarily and customarily associated with existing family homes, particularly where both the existing and proposed uses are permitted by right on the property, and even more particularly, given the current housing demand and the housing market in the state. It creates a affordable housing situation which is fairly limited and increasingly sought after.
Questions? Number 3, please.
The additions, alterations, or improvements would serve to promote the reuse, restoration, rehabilitation, or otherwise enhance an existing building or structure, especially in historic or potentially historic building or structure. 1890 is fairly historic as far as structures go. The applicant plans to completely renovate and enhance both units and interior, as we've addressed. He plans to replace the electric, plumbing, furnace, and more or less update and remodel most of the interior of the structure, and that will significantly enhance the aesthetics and on the inside and the existing home, and it'll add substantial value to the property. So it would enhance the historic building.
Number 4.
The additions, alterations, or improvements would not result in increased hazards to vehicles or pedestrians, impair or impede emergency vehicle access, or the provisions of emergency services, or encroach on the planned right-of-way corridors. Again, no exterior changes. There's sufficient access from Griffin Street to the property. There's sufficient parking on the property for about 4 vehicles. It would be presumably 2 per unit, and that's that.
Questions? Number 5.
The additions, alterations, or improvements would not result in unreasonable impacts to abutting properties by way of increased noise, visual blight, odor, or other nuisance. There's not going to be any issue with that here, if just by the interior reconfiguration from a single family to a 2-family. The home is sizable enough to accommodate 2 units, but it's not so large as anything, or I should say any one that would be moving in there would be anything more than a small family. So it's not going to be an intensive use that we're asking for here.
Questions? Number 6.
There's adequate parking and other necessary support facilities that would be provided for the existing building or structure, as well as for the proposed addition, alteration, or improvement. I've just addressed there's sufficient parking. Both units, or the home is already hooked into municipal water and sewer, and both units would remain that way. And there's sufficient street access, and that's it for that.
Number 7.
The proposed improvement would have been allowed by right prior to adoption of the zoning ordinance provision at issue. At the time that the house was built, it could have been built as a 2-family. There was no zoning ordinance, or it was. I don't know what it was like, to be honest with you, but
The good old days.
it was something I can imagine. Needless to say, it could have been a 2-family in 1890.
Excellent. And number 8, please.
The proposed improvement cannot reasonably be constructed in a differing way or in a differing portion of the property so as to comply with existing setback requirements. Here, this is an interior reconfiguration of an existing building. It's not a detached proposed new structure or an addition that would extend the footprint or anything like that. So it's really the only way to do it, by reconfiguring the interior. And as we've addressed, that these are grandfathered structures and no expansion of any nonconformities.
Okay. Question, Fran? Did you have a question?
No, we were just trying to decide in what year they
Oh.
started building codes. I think it was in the 1970s, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the board, discussions, points, before I open this up to the public? Okay. Is there anybody like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anybody like to speak against this petition? Okay. Yeah, gonna close the public hearing. So just so the board knows, before we go into deliberations and discussion, we were talking just about the special exception. I know that we mentioned the appeal of administrative. We're not discussing that. We're discussing just the special exception. If this is approved, then the other ones are mute. If not, then we'll move on
Th-
to the administrative
Point,
decision.
point
Yes,
of
sir.
order, just for clarification.
Yes.
That's correct, but I would withdraw them after the 30-day appeal period.
Yes, yes.
I just want that clarification, but yes, we would withdraw them, we would not pursue them. Thank you.
No, not a problem. Thank you, Attorney Michael. So, questions, discussions, points, anything?
I'd like to make the motion if no one has any questions or comments.
At your leisure.
I'd like to make the motion to grant the special exception to Joseph and Christine Minor, the petitioner owners, under the section 3.09 of the zoning ordinance, to permit a conversion of an existing single-family dwelling constructed before June 29th, how'd they know it was June 29th, 1953, to a two-family dwelling. The parcel is located at 10 Griffin Street in the C2 General Commercial and Aquifer Conservation Districts, tax map 4D-4, lot 059, in case number 2018-23.
Do I have a second? And there is no special conditions?
No.
All right. When we have a second from Kathleen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 5-0-0.
Thank you. And I was having so much fun
Yeah.
taking you through that.
I could
Mr.
tell.
I really had
Chairman.
prepared so much more.
And we will withdraw the other two in 30 days after the appeal period.
I'm
Thank you.
I'm gonna read those withdrawals in right now, so. We'll be based on Attorney Michael's, comments, we will be withdrawing the appeal of administrative decision, and they will be, within the 30-day appeal period, we'll be withdrawing the appeal to administrative decision and the variance under section 3.02 of the zoning ordinance to convert an existing family. Those will be withdrawn within the 30 days of this. After the 30 days, I apologize. Thank you. Everybody have a beautiful evening. All right, so now down to our annual meeting information. So first things first is election of officers. We have a chair and vice chair position open.
I'm gonna move we nominate Patrick as chair.
All right, are there any other nominations? Seconded by Kathleen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. You don't get off the hook.
All opposed? Abstain? That's 4, that's 4-0, oh, I have 1, I abstain. You have a nomination for vice chair.
I nominate Lynn.
Do I have a second?
Oh, I'm here.
Let's just get it on the
Yep,
air.
the
Yeah.
public didn't,
Who did?
the public didn't without your mic on.
I nominate Lynn Christensen.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Rich seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? 4-0-0. All right, congratulations, Lynn. Next is the proposed rules for procedure amendments. There are two rules, or two things that are being, that were voted on by the state and are being implemented. They surround voting on variances and voting by zoning board of adjustment. Everyone read those in? I'm not gonna read them in, I'm just gonna, as stated in the
Yep.
record, I'm not gonna read them in, but. So am I to understand, I did have a question for staff. Am I to understand that the SB 339 voting by zoning board of adjustment says require the concurring vote of any 3 members to the board to take any action to matter to require it pass? So we no longer need a quorum? Or if we have 3 members that.
That's a quorum.
Yeah, okay.
It is a quorum.
So how does that change from what we've done in the past? You have to have 3 people say yes?
Correct.
How does that change? I
I
don't get why that's changed, or why that was,
I don't know. You can never say that.
I'm not sure what was state law before, but
okay. Staff recommendation is to accept the proposed amendments as written. So do I have,
Also move.
okay, so moved. Do I have a second? Kathleen seconded. All in favor of accepting the proposed amendments by staff, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
And I'm sure
Okay.
staff will keep us legal.
500, so that's approved. We have the minutes for July 25th, 2018. Any changes, comments?
I move we approve as distributed.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Fran seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 500, approved.
Always a joke.
And then, last but not least, is our
Move we
favorite motion, motion to adjourn. All in favor, so moved. Fran, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Everybody, what? Seconded the motion was, for to adjourn was Fran. Second, the proposal was,
I made the motion, Fran seconded.
Fran seconded.
And I made the motion to adjourn.
Fran made the
Okay.
motion to adjourn, and
I seconded.
Lynn seconded.
I think it went the other
Second
way.
only for discussion.
I don't
And
care.
everybody else. That's it.
Actually,
Thank you
it
very
doesn't
much.
need a discussion.
Have a great
I
evening.
second.